Hey guys, how's it going? Long time no see. Haven't made a video in a while. Almost been a week, I think. Geez, what's going on? I don't know. I've just been busy, I guess. But today, want to do a video. I want to show 5 artists whose career was way too brief. Their recorded output was very minimal, but they are brilliant artists. Some of my favorite artists of all time. But for whatever reason, either they passed away young or they just decided to give up recording at some point. I'm going to show 5. I know there's many others, and if you have other examples that you want to clue me into in the comment section, definitely feel free to do so. The first artist that I'm going to show, as I duck my head out of camera, that's not professional, Jeff. You know better than that. You're supposed to be running a professional YouTube channel. Don't duck out of the, well, I ducked out of the way. Tell me how to run my channel. Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. First artist I want to show is Emmett Rhodes. Emmett Rhodes was a singer-songwriter. He was part of a band, I think they're called the Merry-Go-Round or something like that. But anyway, late 60s, and he reminds me, for whatever reason, he reminds me of Elliott Smith. And by the way, when I talk about brief careers, Elliott Smith, you could argue, had a brief career. I'm talking like 3, 4 albums tops. So Elliott Smith wouldn't really fit that bill. So just, I needed to back up a little bit and establish where I'm coming from on this video. So Emmett Rhodes, he had been in the, I think it was called the Merry-Go-Round. Maybe that wasn't it. I don't know. I don't remember. Whatever. I'm talking about Emmett Rhodes, the solo artist. But this was his first solo album, his self-titled album. And I've always compared this to Paul McCartney's work around the Abbey Road album. Some of these songs could have fit very comfortably alongside any of Paul McCartney's stuff on Abbey Road. It's got that feel to it. Just that very melodic, very poppy sound to it, that late 60s, early 70s sound. Songs like With My Face on the Floor is so melodic. And the thing about this is, what really is another link to Paul McCartney, is Emmett Rhodes plays all the instruments himself. He's a multi-instrumentalist, plays every damn instrument on this album, which is amazing. So if they sound a bit like demos, that's why. But With My Face on the Floor is a great one. Somebody Made for Me is fantastic. I heard that for the first time and I thought, oh, that had to have been a more modern song. I thought it would have been released in like the last 10 years, but no, this album, I think it was released in maybe 1970, and I know there's going to be Emmett Rhodes fans out there who are correcting me left and right, but nonetheless, if you see this album in the bins, check it out. So Emmett Rhodes, self-produced, and he recorded, like I said, all the instruments himself, and the record company was on him about, look, you need to be putting out more product. You need to be more prolific. This was his second album. These were all on the Dunhill label, but Emmett Rhodes is such a great, great artist. This is another photograph of him looking very early 70s. But, you know, just Golden Child of God is great. Really Wanted You. Birthday Lady, so many great, great songs. It's really earworm stuff. Once you hear these, you're going to be humming those tunes all day long. But what happened was, eventually, I think he either gave up or he lost his record deal. He just wasn't able to put out records fast enough for his record label. So I think he's got 4 maybe solo albums. He came out with one years later, like in the, I want to say mid to, I don't know, like 2005, 2006, something like that. But he stopped recording. It was like in the early 70s, mid-early 70s. Was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. It stopped being fun. The record company was on his ass all the time. I don't think he was touring. A little bit like Harry Nilsson in that way, if Harry Nilsson had just given up before he really kind of hit it big. But people who know Emmett Rhodes know what a great artist he is. So if you find either of these albums, I don't have his third album, but definitely check these ones out. Next artist that I'm going to talk about, and I've been trying to turn everybody on to this band. I don't know why, it just kind of occurred to me. This might be a band that a lot of people would be interested in, but I want to talk a little bit about Joy Division. This is their first album, Unknown Pleasures. This is their second album, Closer. So Joy Division was Bernard Sumner. Peter Hook, I believe, founded the band. They went to a Sex Pistols concert and were blown away and decided immediately to form a band. They had, I forget the drummer's name. So yeah, I'm just a wealth of knowledge in this video. Great job, Jeff. But anyway, they formed the band and they got a drummer whose name I can't remember. And Ian Curtis said, hey, he was friends with them. He said, I'll sing. And so they started out with a very punk sound. They had an early single. It was actually an early EP. And it sounds very punk-like late 70s punk. And then they started getting into more sonically interesting territory, darker territory. This was really kind of the birth of Gothic music, if you will. But Unknown Pleasures is a great, great dark record. You can hear like Susie and the Banshees. You can hear Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus on here, Echo and the Bunnymen, The Cure. So many bands were influenced by Joy Division. And the thing about Ian Curtis, he was their singer, he was their songwriter, but he slowly developed epilepsy. And so when he was performing on stage, suddenly he would have these epileptic seizures. And he was very embarrassed about it. In some cases, they had to stop the show, carry him off the stage, and he... really, it almost kind of became part of his act. People didn't know, like, is he dancing in a weird way or is he having a seizure? And so as their touring schedule got heavier and heavier, as they started to begin to get a little more successful, he started to have more seizures. His epilepsy started to get exacerbated. They recorded their second album. This was recorded in 1979, released in 1979. This was recorded in early 1980. Ian Curtis, his marriage was breaking up. He was having an affair. And his wife was leaving him. He was kind of tormented by his epilepsy. And very shortly after this album was recorded, he took his own life. Actually, even before this record was released. And it was the night before they were due to leave on a big tour of America. This was going to be the tour that broke them through in the United States. And he couldn't take it. He hung himself in his home, and that drew a curtain on one of the most fantastic bands of the late 70s. In Joy Division. But of course, the remaining members went on to form New Order, and the rest, as they say, is history. And you can still hear a little bit of Joy Division in the early New Order, like their song Ceremony was actually a song that Ian Curtis wrote. Bernard Sumner did the vocals, but he does it in very Ian Curtis kind of a way. The first album, Movement, has elements of Joy Division sound in it, but just have to wonder if Joy Division had carried on, if Ian Curtis had lived, you know, how big would they have been? Would they have been bigger than The Cure? We will never know, unfortunately. This is a third album. This was kind of culled together from some unreleased tracks, some B-sides, a live concert as part of this. But this is an interesting, if you need more Joy Division than those two, this is definitely one to pick up. But anyway, yeah. So my next artist that I want to show is one that I've always trumpeted on my channel. That is going to be Jeff Buckley. This was his first EP, although now it's a deluxe set, so it's a 2 CD set, live at Chennai. His dad was Tim Buckley, who was a singer, folk singer in the late 60s, and then got into some very experimental music in the early 70s. So much so that his music was unrecognizable. He started out very folky, kind of, I don't know who you'd compare him to. You know, his sound was kind of like early Fairport Convention, I guess you might say. He was in an episode of the Monkees performing his song. And then he just kind of veered off and started doing some really weird avant-garde, Ornette Coleman kind of stuff on his records. And he died of a heroin overdose in, I think it was 1975. His son was Jeff Buckley, and Jeff Buckley grew up listening to his dad's records, but when Tim Buckley was alive, he was an absentee father, did not see Jeff very much, but Jeff had that innate musical talent that his father had, and started playing in clubs around New York City. And this is live at Chennai, his first record release, if you will. It was put out as an EP. And then his first studio album, which is an unqualified masterpiece, is Grace. And of course, I don't need to tell you guys about Grace. If you haven't checked it out yet, you don't know what you're missing. You need to absolutely get a hold of this record because it is fantastic. He had such an amazing voice, was a great gifted songwriter. He does an arrangement of Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, which is the definitive version of that. You got Dream Brother, which talks about his relationship with his dad leaving him, and some wisdom that he imparts to a friend who is going through a divorce. So Real is an incredible track. The title track, Grace, is incredible. Last Goodbye, I think actually was on alternative radio back in the day, but make sure you check this out. Robert Plant was a huge Jeff Buckley fan. Chris Cornell loved Jeff Buckley. And the story with Jeff Buckley was he released Grace in 1994, went on some tours, and then started recording his follow-up album, which was going to be called My Sweetheart the Drunk. He did some sessions in New York, and then he assembled a band and went down to Memphis, Tennessee, to finish recording the album, and he rented a house, and he had not been down there very shortly when he and a friend of his decided to go swimming in the Wolf River. He had some heavy boots on. There were signs saying, "Do not swim, it's dangerous," but he thought, well, I'll just wade in very shallow and just kind of take a dip. And next thing is new, his friend turned his back, and Jeff was gone. He got sucked under the water. There was a passing tugboat, which the undercurrent dragged him under the water, and he very tragically drowned. This is kind of what we have left of the studio tracks, the recordings that he was making at the time of his death. In some ways, it sounds like a fleshed out album. In other ways, these sound like they would have definitely been further embellished in the studio, but we will never know, very tragically. But again, one of those just gifted artists, like what could have been, what great music would they have gone on to make? We unfortunately will never know. Next artist I want to talk about, because I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, I want to talk about Sid Barrett. Yeah, Sid Barrett, who was instrumental in forming Pink Floyd. He was their chief singer, their songwriter. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was a brilliant Pink Floyd album debut. They were recording it at Abbey Road Studios the same time that the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper. But it is just a great psychedelic piece of 1967 magic. So check that album out. And then Sid Barrett took too much LSD. He had some mental health issues going on, and he just started to kind of come apart at the seams. There were shows he'd be on stage and he would just zone out, stop singing, just kind of staring off, like with a catatonic look on his face. Or he would start playing the song in a different arrangement or a different time signature, or start singing different lyrics. And he just got very unpredictable on stage, and Pink Floyd had had enough. They're like, we're not putting up with this guy. And so the story goes that they had a gig and they just decided not to pick him up. They recruited David Gilmour. They were going to originally be kind of like a quintet, but then eventually they just dropped the idea of Sid Barrett being their Brian Wilson, because he couldn't even get it together in the studio. So they got David Gilmour, who very fortunately was a gifted singer, and went on to bigger and better things. But Sid Barrett recorded two solo albums, and this one was actually produced by Roger Waters and David Gilmour. It was a very torturous affair for them, because Sid, again, would not play the same arrangement twice, was just kind of spaced out in the studio. They felt very lucky they were able to get an entire album out of him, but David Gilmour, it was definitely at his wit's end by the end of these recording sessions. But he got some great songs on here, very in some ways a lot like Piper and the Gates of Dawn, in some ways not so much, because again, Sid Barrett's psyche was very fragile, unraveling, and so some of the music on here is very strange, very bizarre. Terrapin is a great track. Golden Hair is fantastic. Octopus. This is a brilliant, brilliant album in spite of the fact that it is so quirky, so bizarre. His follow-up was just titled Barrett. David Gilmour produced this album as well. Not quite as great as the first album, but still an enjoyable listen. If you like Sid Barrett, kind of that whole, I don't know how you want to call it, but just in some ways they almost sound like very innocent children's songs, but in other ways they're so deep and so mysterious, you don't really know what to make of them. But definitely check that one out. And then also Opal, which Sid Barrett stopped recording after the Barrett album. He just kind of retreated to his parents' home and isolated himself, became a hermit. He did emerge during the Wish You Were Here sessions with Pink Floyd and kind of stumbled into the studio and like, hey, what's going on? You want me to help out? And they're like, no, thank you, weirdo. They had no idea it was Sid Barrett until he left. So this was his last studio album, but Opal are kind of like outtakes, alternate takes of the songs from his first couple albums. Some leftover tracks made their way on here, but an interesting listen. There are people who are rabid Sid Barrett fans that want to own every single moment of recorded tape that Sid Barrett laid down, but I wouldn't say I am quite that rabid about him, but just brilliant, great artist who unfortunately just stopped putting out music after a certain period of time. And then the last artist I want to talk about is my beloved Nick Drake. Love Nick Drake. He was an English singer-songwriter. This one is kind of folky, but not really folk in the true sense, but very melodic. And his guitar tunings were so unique. People have still not been able to unravel how he tuned the guitar on some of these songs. But this is gorgeous. It's sort of folk music with like some, I don't know what you want to call it, like I don't say orchestration, but there are some strings in the background, but kind of like, you know how Paul Buckmaster did on the Elton John albums, those early Elton John albums. It's not like ELO or anything like that. Moody Blues for that matter. It's just very tastefully done. And these songs are great. I love Riverman. They're very they're dark, they're somber. But at the same time, once you hear Nick Drake, you just fall in love with him. You fall in love with his voice, fall in love with his melodies. His songwriting is so great. He expanded his sound a bit on this next album, his second album, Brighter Later, which is great. He's got, what's his name? Richard Thompson from Fairport Convention plays guitar on here. So you got a little bit, this has almost got some jazz textures to it, but still great songwriting, great musicianship on here. This is great. I heard Pete from Pete's CD World talk about like Sunday brunch music. Nick Drake is perfect Sunday brunch music. It's just music that you can chill out to. So after that, Nick Drake would not tour. He had stage fright like nobody's business, so he would not go out and tour. He played a couple of, small clubs, coffee houses, and then decided to quit altogether because he just couldn't cope. And so the last album that he put out, he recorded at a home studio. The record label wasn't even expecting it. One day, Nick Drake just showed up and he said, here, I've got the tapes to my next album. This is strictly acoustic. And it's Nick's final album. Shortly after this album, he overdosed on some meds that he was taking for his depression and committed suicide. So very tragic. But this, the song Pink Moon is probably one you've heard in commercials before. But, again, this is very autobiographical and sometimes dark, but very introspective lyrics. He's such like I said, a brilliant guitar player. But Nick Drake, check him out if you have not yet. So anyway, those are my 5. Let me know if you got any others, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind, and those are the ones that connect with me the most. I love every single one of those artists to death. Love their music. But anyway, check them out if you haven't already, and take it easy.